Okay, everybody. Today, today we'll talk about the spinal cord. You know that central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. In last lecture, I uh, talked about the brain. Today, I'll talk about the spinal cord. First, we'll see the anatomy of the spinal cord. We'll see from where it starts and where it ends. We'll see the length and diameter. We'll see how it looks like from outside. Okay, so we'll see the external features. That means how the spinal cord looks like from outside. We'll see inside the spinal cord. Then we'll talk about the spinal nerves. From both sides of the spinal cord, 31 pairs of nerves arise. Those are called the spinal nerves. Arise from the spinal cord. How many? 31 pairs. Okay. We'll see how a spinal nerve is formed from the spinal cord. That is the spinal nerve formation. Inside the spinal cord, there are two types of tracts. Tracts are the bundles of fibers. I mentioned that in last class. So tracts are the bundles of fibers. And there are two types of tracts are present inside the spinal cord. Some tracts are taking the signal towards the brain. That means upwards, right? Some are taking the signal down. Okay, so ascending and descending tracts. Then we'll talk about the relay of signal. What kind of signal? Electrical, right? Through the nervous system, electrical signal is transmitted. So when the electrical signal is transmitted, just see that if I touch the skin, right, that signal goes where? To the brain, right? And when the signal travels, this is sensory signal, you know that, towards the brain. When the signal travels to the brain, in 3 locations, relay of signal takes place. That means one neuron gives signal to another neuron in 3 locations. You have seen the relay race, right? One person runs up to a certain distance, right, and hands the stick to the next person, right? So same way, the signal is carried by one group of neurons to a certain distance, then give the signal to another set of neurons, and then they take the signal to up to a certain distance and give the signal to another set of neurons. So that's the relay. Same thing, you know, the motor command comes from the brain to the muscle, for example, to move, right? That signal is going from the brain to the muscle. So that is the motor, and relay occurs in descending pathway too, or motor pathway. So both in sensory pathway and motor pathway, the relay takes place. Then we'll talk about the spinal cord trauma, injury to the spinal cord. Very commonly heard term, right? We hear that injury to the spinal cord and what can happen due to the trauma to the spinal cord. First, the location. Spinal cord is located inside the vertebral column, inside this. Okay, that means protected by the vertebrae. Extent of the spinal cord. Spinal cord starts here foramen magnum, you know, this big foramen here, and that's the upper end, and lower end ends at lumbar 1 or lumbar 2 vertebrae. So this is lumbar 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st. So either here or sometimes goes to L2, lumbar 2. So that is the extent of the spinal cord. That means below L2, certainly there is no spinal cord. Make sense? So that's the extent. Length of the spinal cord. Spinal cord in adult person is about 18 inches long. That means 45 centimeter and half inch or 14 millimeter wide. Function of the spinal cord. As I have already mentioned, inside the spinal cord you have two types of tracts or bundles of fibers. Some are taking the signal towards the brain, right? Ascending. Some are taking the signal down. So, two ways communication. Carries signal from the peripheral nerve to the brain that I have mentioned. For example, touch, that signal goes to the spinal cord and then spinal cord takes to the brain. And when the brain sends signal to the muscle from the brain through the spinal cord, signal goes down and then gets out from the spinal cord. So, both way transmission of signal. Protection of the spinal cord. Like your brain, spinal cord is also a very important organ. That's why it is also protected by heavily by a number of structures. If you see the structures around the spinal cord from outside to inside, first is the vertebrae, the bone I have already mentioned, because the spinal cord is located inside the vertebral column, right? So vertebrae. Then next is the epidural fat. This one is only present around the spinal cord, not around the brain. Remember when we talked about the structures protect your brain, there was no fat. But around the spinal cord, in epidural space, that means outside of the dura mater, you have fat. That's called the epidural fat. And then you have the dura mater. Then arachnoid mater and innermost meninges is the pia mater. So all these structures are same as around the brain except the epidural fat. Make sense? Remember that. Pia mater is the innermost meninges which is directly attached to the surface of the spinal cord. So attached to the spinal cord. You have spaces, epidural space that has the fat, subdural is inside the dura mater, then subarachnoid space under the arachnoid mater, and subarachnoid space contains the cerebrospinal fluid. You already know, same as brain. Subarachnoid space contains the fluid called the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. And then the spinal cord. So you see the spinal cord, outer part you can see here. Now look at the spinal cord. Outer part is the white matter and inner part looks like a butterfly. That's the gray matter. That means the cell bodies of neurons are in the gray matter, you already know, and in the outer part you have the fibers, myelinated fibers. That's why white, right? So all the fibers are in the outer part and the cell bodies are in the gray matter. That means in the inner part. Now another thing you see here, from both sides of the spinal cord, spinal nerves arise. Here you just see one pair, that means two. There are total 31 pairs of spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord. So that is how the spinal cord is protected in your body. Okay. External features. If you see, or external anatomy, if you see the spinal cord, in two locations you have expansion, and one is called cervical enlargement and another is called lumbar enlargement. So in two locations the spinal cord is wider or expanded. Those are called the expansions, where one is in cervical part here in the neck part and one is in the lumbar part. Okay, in these two locations the spinal cord is expanded. Why? You see, the nerves of upper limbs, right? These nerves take signal to the cervical part of the spinal cord. Make sense? Many nerves, right, going from the upper limbs, where going to the cervical part. That's why you need more neurons to process the signal there, right? Make sense? Same thing from the lower limbs, your legs, many nerves are taking signal to the spinal cord, to this part, lumbar part. That's why that part is expanded, because more neuron is there to receive or send the signal from or to those nerves. Make sense? So that's why in those two locations you see expansions, because the nerves from upper and lower limbs get there. Anyway, so two expansions. Then denticulate ligaments. You know that pia mater is the innermost meninges which is attached to the surface of the spinal cord. So this is the pia mater attached to the spinal cord, and then you have the arachnoid mater, and then outermost meninges is the dura mater. Same thing here, right? So this is the dura mater, this is the arachnoid mater. Okay. So from the pia mater, ligaments arise like this. These are not nerves, these are ligaments. So from the pia, ligaments arise and get attached to the dura mater, pass through the arachnoid. Okay, and these are called denticulate ligaments, to keep the spinal cord stable inside the vertebral column. So these are called denticulate ligaments from the pia to the dura. So it's like, you know, I'm tying somebody with rope, right, from both sides, like this, to the wall. Make sense? So from the pia to the dura. So you won't be able to move much. The lower end of the spinal cord is cone shaped, conical, like goes like this. And that end is called conus medullaris, cone shaped lower end, conus medullaris, 2L. Okay. Lower conical or cone shaped end of the spinal cord. Then from the lower end, many nerve roots, these are called spinal nerve roots, arise like this. And it looks like a horse tail, tail of a horse. I don't know if you have seen that, horse tail, like bunch of nerve roots. And that horse tail like bunch of nerve roots is called the chordae equine, which means horse tail. So chordae equine. Okay, and then another structure, a thin cord-like structure, thin cord arises from the lower pointed end of the spinal cord, goes downwards. A thin cord that is called phylum terminale, which arises from the lower pointed end of the spinal cord or conus medullaris to the coccyx, the tailbone. So this is the coccyx, and this cord, thin cord, is the phylum terminale. So this is the phylum terminale. Okay, that thin cord that also helps to hold the spinal cord in right location, prevents movement. So you see, these are some structures you can see from outside, external anatomy. Denticulate ligaments arise from the pia mater and get attached to the dura, and then lower cone-shaped end of the spinal cord is conus medullaris. Bunch of nerve roots in the lower end form horse tail-like structure that is called the chordae equine, and the thin cord that connects the lower end to the coccyx, that is the phylum terminale. Make sense? So just remember those are, and how many enlargements? 2, cervical and lumbar. So in this picture you can see those structures. Lumbar puncture. Lumbar puncture is a procedure to collect the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. You know that your spinal cord ends at which vertebral level? L1 or L2, sometimes L2. L1 most of the time, lumbar 1, sometimes if it is a little bit longer goes to L2, makes sense? But it won't go to L3. So below the L2 is the safer location from where we can collect the cerebrospinal fluid. You know that cerebrospinal fluid is here in subarachnoid space, right? This is the subarachnoid space, and what happens, the coverings, meninges, go further down. So if you insert a needle here to L3 or L4, it is safe. No spinal cord is there, but the meninges are there. Cerebrospinal fluid is also here. Okay, so what we do, we insert needle to lower lumbar level and collect the cerebrospinal fluid from there, because we know that spinal cord certainly ends at L2, if not L1, L2. Then below that we have cerebrospinal fluid but no spinal cord. So what we do, you see here, we insert the needle through these openings. We ask the patient to lie down sideways and turn the upper part forward like this. When you do that, you see that if you do that, then these openings get bigger, open more. So you can easily feel these spinous processes and insert needle through the opening. That's the lumbar puncture. Okay, are you trying to feel it? Make sense? So through these openings, and then we draw the cerebrospinal fluid from there, which is safe. Make sense? If you do in upper lumbar or upper areas, then there is a chance that you will hit the spinal cord. That will cause the injury, right? We don't want that. Okay. Now, why we need to collect the cerebrospinal fluid? If you suspect that someone might have injury in the central nervous system, in the brain or the spinal cord, you will look for blood in the cerebrospinal fluid. If there is any blood, that tells that hemorrhage or bleeding has occurred, right? Make sense? If any bleeding occurs anywhere in your brain or the spinal cord, you should be able to see blood in the cerebrospinal fluid, because you know that cerebrospinal fluid is circulating, right? Everywhere around the brain and the spinal cord, so that blood should be found from in the cerebrospinal fluid. That is one. To see if there is any blood or any microorganism. If you suspect that meningitis or any infection has occurred in the central nervous system, you will culture the cerebrospinal fluid to see if there is any microorganism, bacteria or virus, right? And in that way you can diagnose the problem and treat the patient. So that's why we collect the cerebrospinal fluid. It is very important. Formation of the spinal nerve. We know that 41 pairs of spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord. If you see how a spinal nerve is formed, if I make a cross section of the spinal cord like this, look at me, like this, cut like this, and see it. So this is the cross section. This is the central canal. You know that cerebrospinal fluid also passes through the central canal. And you also know that inner part looks like a butterfly, and that is the gray matter I just showed you a few minutes ago. So this is the gray matter. Okay, and the outer part is the white matter. White matter. So inner gray matter, outer white matter. In each side of the gray matter, you have 3 horns. You see horn-like structures. These are called horns. The ventral horn. This is the front. This is the back. So this is the ventral horn. Okay. This is the lateral horn. And this is the dorsal horn. So you have 3 horns in each half of the gray matter of the spinal cord, or is each side of the gray matter. Now, you already know that gray matter contains the cell bodies of neurons. That's why it looks gray. I have mentioned a few times already. So you have the cell bodies of neurons. In ventral horn, you have motor neurons. Motor neurons in the ventral horn. In dorsal horn, you have different types of neurons. In dorsal horn, you have sensory. Neurons. Okay? Sensory neurons in dorsal horn. In lateral horn, you have another type of hormones. So in three horns, you have three different types of neurons. So what type of neurons in lateral horn? These are called autonomic. Neurons. You know, sympathetic, parasympathetic, autonomic neurons. So you see, three horns have three types of neurons. Now, what happens? You know that sensory signals enter into the spinal cord from outside. You already know that. So these are the sensory fibers, nerve fibers. Let me give you again the example you already know. If I touch, same example I am giving. If I touch, that is the sensory signal, right? Goes to the spinal cord, right? So nerve fibers carry the signal to the spinal cord, towards the spinal cord. So that's the sensory. So this way, going to the sensory neurons. That's why you have sensory neurons here. They are receiving the signal. Make sense? Sensory signal. So these are sensory nerve fibers. Okay, and here you have a ganglion. Ganglion is a round structure in the peripheral nervous system. That means outside of central nervous system, where you have the cell bodies again, the neurons. This is called dorsal root ganglion. And this bundle of sensory fibers is called dorsal root. Dorsal root. That's why this ganglion is called dorsal root ganglion, because it is in the dorsal root. So this bundle of fibers, sensory fibers, is called dorsal root, and the ganglion is the round structure there which contains the sensory neurons, cell bodies, that is called dorsal root ganglion. Ganglion in the dorsal root. Okay. So all these are sensory neurons, because this is sensory pathway taking the signal towards the spinal cord or to the spinal cord. Okay. Now, for example, from your skin or body, the signal goes to these neurons. So these neurons receive the signal from these fibers and then send the signal to these neurons. Okay. So that's the sensory. Now you know that sensory signal goes to the brain. For example, if something very hot touches your skin, that signal goes to the spinal cord. The spinal cord takes it to the brain, right? Then brain processes that, right? Integration, and sends motor command to the muscle to move the hand away, right? So the motor signal will go down and from the spinal cord to the muscle. That means what? The motor command will come down from the brain. Look at me. Come down from the brain, will be received by these neurons, and these neurons will send signal to the outside towards the muscle, for example. Okay, so this is motor fibers. These are sensory fibers. Okay, and this bundle of motor fibers is called ventral root. Very simple. This is dorsal root, sensory fibers. This is ventral root, motor fibers. So this is the ventral root. Bundle of motor fibers. There is no ganglion in ventral root. Ganglion is only in the dorsal root. Okay, now these fibers take the signal out from the spinal cord this way, and then what happens you see here, these motor fibers of ventral root and the sensory fibers of dorsal root, they meet together here. They join together. That means the ventral and dorsal root join together, and that is the spinal nerve. So this is the spinal nerve. Okay, that's how the spinal nerve is formed, by the meeting or union of ventral and dorsal roots. And ventral roots motor fibers, dorsal roots what kind of fibers? Sensory fibers, right? So they meet and form the spinal nerve. Is it clear? So if I ask you, let's go back. In the gray matter of the spinal cord, in each side, how many horns you have? Three. Ventral, dorsal and lateral. Make sense? In ventral horn, you have what kind of neurons? Motor. Dorsal, sensory, right? And lateral, autonomic. And ventral neurons, motor neurons, send signal outwards. Make sense? Because motor. And dorsal horn neurons, sensory neurons, receive the signal from outside. The fibers take the signal from motor neurons to the outside, bundle together to form the ventral root. Is it clear? And the fibers that bring the signal, sensory signal, to the sensory neurons here, bundle together to form what? Dorsal root, right? So if I ask you in your test that dorsal root contains what kind of fibers? Sensory or motor? Sensory. Ventral root, motors. Where you have a ganglion? Dorsal root, right? No ganglion in ventral root, right? Ganglion is a round structure that contains sensory neurons because it is in sensory pathway, right? So these are all sensory neurons. You see, these are sensory neurons, these are sensory neurons, these are motor neurons. Now, the spinal nerve is formed by the union of ventral and dorsal roots. That means sensory and motor fibers are both here. Is it clear? That means spinal nerve is a mixed type nerve. Is it clear? Not purely motor, not purely sensory. It has both kinds of fibers. Make sense? That's why it is what? What kind of nerve? Mixed nerve. Okay. So if I ask you, spinal nerve is a kind of nerve. It is a mixed type nerve. Mixed nerve. That means it has both sensory and motor fibers. Same with in this side, you see, same thing happens in this side. Spinal nerve is formed. 31 pairs we have. In each segment, we have one pair. Now, after the spinal nerve is formed, spinal nerve is very short and it comes out through the intervertebral foramen. What are the intervertebral foramen? You see, let me show you. So, in both sides you have, you see here, the openings. So through these intervertebral foramen, spinal nerve comes out. Same thing in this side. Okay, spinal nerves come out, and then it divides again. So the spinal nerve is a short nerve and it comes out through the intervertebral foramen and then divides again like this. And in each division, you have both sensory and motor fibers. And these are called ramus. This is dorsal ramus, and this is ventral ramus. Plural is rami, R-A-M-I. Ramus is singular. So now you see, interestingly, roots have one type of fibers. For example, ventral root has only motor, dorsal only sensory. Spinal nerve mixed, and ramus is also mixed because from the spinal nerve both types of fibers enter into both branches. And then your body is here. This is the body. This is the body wall. Okay. So you see, in this way, if this is the front of the body, this is the back of your body, both front and back of the body getting both sensory and motor fibers. Make sense? Is it clear? So just now think, if spinal nerve is not formed here, if your body is here, then what would have happened? The ventral part of your body will only get what kind of fibers? Motor, right? No sensory there. That means you don't have any sensations in ventral part. Make sense? And dorsal part only sensory, no movement, but sensation is there. Is it? Make sense? So which should not happen, right? Everywhere of your body should get both sensory and motor. Is it clear? That's why the spinal nerve formation is very important. Then rami, and everywhere of your body gets both sensory and motor fibers, innervations. Okay, so just remember this picture. If I ask you in your test that draw and show me the formation of the spinal nerve, you should be able to draw this and show it to me. Okay, that is number one. Number two, I can ask any question from here, like ventral, how many horns? Right. Each horn contains what type of neurons, right? How many roots? What kind of fibers? How many ganglia? Where it is, right? Spinal nerve. How many? 31 pairs. What kind of nerves are these? Mixed, right? Ramus contains what kind of fibers, okay? So the questions will be like that. Okay, now we'll see the white matter part, the outer part. In outer part, white matter, you have bundle of fibers. Bundle of fibers. Those are called tracts. As I have already mentioned, two types of tracts are there, right? In the white matter. How many types? Two, ascending and descending. Remember, because spinal cord provides two-way communication. Some tracts are taking signal towards the brain, right? Ascending. Some are taking the signal down. So which one is sensory? Towards, right? Sensory, going towards. Motor is downwards. So that's why you have two types of tracts. Where? In the white matter of the spinal cord, because white matter is formed by the fibers, myelinated fibers, you know that. So sensory or ascending, motor or descending tracts are present in the white matter of the spinal cord. So here you see by two different colors, you can see two types of tracts or bundles of fibers. The blue ones are sensory or ascending, red ones are motor or descending. Okay, just you need to remember the name of few of these important tracts, not all, and the function. First, sensory tracts. Important sensory tracts are spinothalamic, going from the spinal cord to the thalamus. That's why I called it spinothalamic. Its name is telling you it is sensory because starting where? Spinal cord and going to the thalamus is in the brain, right? So just think that spinothalamic, which way it should go? Upwards. Make sense? Because thalamus is in the brain. So spinothalamic tracts. There are two pairs, ventral and lateral. You see ventral in the front and lateral in the side. So ventral and lateral spinothalamic tracts. Function: pain, temperature, and soft or fine touch. So those sensory signals are taken to the thalamus or brain by spinothalamic tract. Which signals? Pain, temperature, and soft or fine touch. Make sense? Spinothalamic. Spinocerebellar, from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. This must be sensory because cerebellum is in the brain, right? So going to the brain. Anybody remember the function of cerebellum? I mentioned that in last class. Maintaining what? Balance and equilibrium, right? So what kind of signal should go to the cerebellum to tell the cerebellum your body position, right? Which way your body is position is or tilted in. That signal from the joints and muscles. Make sense? From the joints and muscles, the body position signal goes to the cerebellum. So that's the function of spinocerebellar tract. Carries what kind of signal? Body position signal. Because your cerebellum need to know your body position to maintain the balance. Make sense? Otherwise it won't be able to maintain. No, it won't know which way your body is moving. So from where? Muscle and joints, right? Because those are the locations your body position signals are created. Okay. Then in the back part you have two fasciculus. It's like tract, not different than tract, but they are called fasciculus. Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, so just know that these fasciculi are mainly responsible for crude touch or deep touch or pressure signal. Now if you see the important motor tracts, the red ones, the most important motor tract is the corticospinal. Corticospinal tract, from the cortex to the spinal cord, cerebral cortex, you must remember. This tract is the main motor tract and takes what kind of signal from the cortex to the body? The movement of the skeletal muscles. So this tract, you must remember, in the brain you have primary motor cortex. I showed you in last class. Primary motor cortex sends signal to the muscles. Primary means main, motor, that means movement. So the skeletal muscles get signal from the brain through this tract. That's why it is the most important, because skeletal muscles help to move the body parts. This tract is also called pyramidal tract. Another name of it is pyramidal tract. Corticospinal goes to the skeletal muscles from the brain. Signal. Other motor tracts are rubrospinal, vestibulospinal, tectospinal. Just remember those four. Corticospinal is the most powerful. Others are, if I ask you, mention few: rubrospinal, vestibulospinal, and tectospinal. Now you see one thing, very simple. If you see the tract, the name of the tract ends with spinal. For example, corticospinal, rubrospinal, tectospinal, vestibulospinal. If ends with spinal, that is what? Motor. Make sense? And if starts with spino, that is sensory. For example, spinothalamic, spinocerebellar, right? Exceptions of sensory that don't start with spino are fasciculus, fasciculus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus. So very simple. If I ask you, corticospinal tract is what kind of tract? Motor, because it ends with spinal. Make sense? Rubrospinal ends with spinal. Spinothalamic is what? Sensory or motor? Sensory, because it starts with spinal. Okay. So just remember what I have mentioned. Now you must remember, I mentioned along the sensory pathway in 3 locations relay takes place. That means one set of sensory neurons gives signal to next set of sensory neurons. Relay race. You are giving signal or stick to another group of people. So along the sensory pathway, for example, if I touch your skin, that sensory signal goes to the spinal cord, then to the brain. So it's a long way, right? It's a long way. One neuron cannot take the signal that far. Is it clear? Can't be that long. So that's why you need relay stations. In sensory pathway or ascending pathway, you have 3 stations or 3 locations or 3 sets of neurons. First order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. You already know first 2. You see here, if something touches here, your skin, this is the body, right? So that sensory signal goes from the receptors to these neurons. So these are the first order neurons, right? In sensory pathway. Where? In dorsal root ganglion. So first order neurons are in dorsal root ganglion. Is it clear? Make sense? Okay. So from the skin, the sensory signal is going first to these neurons. That's why these are the first order neurons. Then the signal from these neurons go to the dorsal horn. These are also sensory neurons. So these are second order neurons, right? So first order neurons, and these are the second order neurons. In dorsal horn. Then the signal starts to go upwards through the tracts. You remember the sensory tracts or ascending tracts. And here is the thalamus in the brain receive the signal, sensory signal. You must remember thalamus is called the major sensory relay station I mentioned in last class. So this is the thalamus. Right? And third order neurons are here. Third order neurons. Okay? So you see, along the sensory pathway, there are three groups of neurons. First order neurons in dorsal root ganglion, second order in dorsal horn, third order in the thalamus. Okay? And from the thalamus, we will go to the cerebral cortex. Okay? So that is the sensory pathway. In motor pathway, another thing, just remember, nervous system is not that easy. Okay? Very complicated. We are trying to make it very simple. Okay? For example, if I touch, same example I am giving you, touch here, that signal will be taken to the spinal cord, right? Remember enlargement. So we'll go to the spinal cord here. Then the signal will be received by the dorsal horn neurons here, and will go to the thalamus, the brain. But now you look at me. If the sensory signal, the sight, visual signal goes from the eye to the brain, it doesn't need to go down to the spinal cord and then go to the brain. Make sense? Auditory, from the ear, it can go to the brain, right? It doesn't need to come down and go up. So these are also sensory. So in these occasions, for example, you are looking at something, you are hearing something, the signal goes from here, not to the dorsal horn neurons, because dorsal horn in the spinal cord, makes sense? Will go where? To the brain stem, medulla oblongata. That's why you see here that spinal cord or medulla, makes sense? So from the lower part, below this, signal will go to the spinal cord, dorsal horn. But if from here, should not go to the spinal cord, should go where? To the medulla oblongata in the brain here. Then go to the thalamus. Makes sense? So in that case, the second order neurons are not here, but in the medulla oblongata of the brain. So now you will understand this picture. You see, from the hand or from the foot, the sensory signal goes to the dorsal root ganglion. This is the dorsal root ganglion, right? These neurons, then to the dorsal horn. Same thing from the foot, dorsal root ganglion, then to the dorsal horn. Then goes up all the way. Look at the next slide. Here, to the thalamus. So ascending tract, right? Inside the spinal cord, takes the signal to the thalamus. This is the thalamus. Okay. Then to the respective cortices. If it is visual, we'll go to the visual cortex. Make sense? Auditory, we'll go to the auditory cortex. You remember there are functional areas I mentioned in last class, right? Different functional areas. So depending on what kind of sensation is that, it will go sent to the respective areas in the cortex. So that is the ascending or sensory pathway. In how many locations relay occurs? 3. Very good. First is? Very good. Second? Dorsal horn. Makes sense? And third? Thalamus. Okay, then goes to the respective cortices. If it is visual, we'll go to visual cortex. Auditory, we'll go to auditory. Touch, pain, somatosensory cortex. Okay. Okay. Now, descending pathway. Descending pathway is easier than sensory. Why? Because the neurons are only in 2 locations. That means 2 sets of neurons, not 3. So let me draw So this is your brain, and this is the primary motor cortex. So these are the upper motor neurons. We know motor goes down from the brain. So we are looking from the brain to the muscle, downwards. So upper motor neurons. This is the first set of neurons. Where? In the cerebral cortex. This is the cortex in the brain. And then the motor command or signal goes to the spinal cord through the descending tract. You remember the motor tracts, corticospinal, rubrospinal, whatever. So motor signal will go to the spinal cord from the cortex. From the upper motor neurons, signal will go here to the ventral horn. You already know these are the motor neurons. So these are second or lower. We use lower motor neurons. So upper motor neurons in the cerebral cortex and lower motor neurons in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. Only two sets. Is it clear? So not very difficult. And then from here, you know that motor signal will go to the ventral root, spinal nerve, then ventral and dorsal rami to the body, to the muscle of the motor. Because motor is the movement, should go to the muscle, not to the skin. Okay. Now, again, just to remind, in sensory pathway, how many sets of neurons? 3. In motor pathway, how many sets? 2. Upper motor and lower motor. Okay? And now, you just remember, this is very important, the lower motor neurons always try to send the signal to the muscles to contract the muscles. So lower motor neurons always try to forcefully contract the muscles. Okay? Upper motor neurons are always sending signal to, upper motor neurons are always sending signal to the lower motor neurons and inhibiting them, telling them don't contract the muscle forcefully. Clear? I am repeating again. Lower motor neurons are sending signal to the muscles and trying to do what? Contract forcefully. Clear? Upper motor neurons are sending signal to the lower motor neurons and telling that don't contract forcefully. So inhibiting this. Make sense? Okay. And that's how the muscles are not fully contracted, not fully relaxed. In your body, always muscle tone is there, right? Partially contracted, right? Normally, right? Little bit contraction is there, always, but not completely contracted or relaxed. If that is the case, you won't be able to move, right? If it's squeezed strongly, you won't be able to move. If it is relaxed, no tone, you won't be able to move. So that's why these two sets of neurons are very important. It is like, sometime you take your small child or kid to a park, right? Sometime you take, and you sit or read a book and tell your child, play in this area, right? Don't go too far, then we'll get lost. Stay within this area. So you are upper motor neuron and your child is lower motor neuron, hyper, right? Your child is hyper, like will try to escape, go far. You are inhibiting, right? If your child goes far, you bring back, right? Stay here. Make sense? So upper motor neurons are always controlling or inhibiting the lower motor neurons, and lower motor neurons are always hyper, try to contract forcefully. That's how the partial tone is in the muscle. Now you tell me, if these lower motor neurons are destroyed due to spinal cord injury or some other reason, if the lower motor neurons, no, first let's go the upper part, okay? If the upper motor neurons are destroyed here due to stroke or something, then no inhibition will go from here to here. Make sense? So no inhibition. So lower motor neurons will get freedom, right? So what will happen in the muscle? Spasm will occur, right? Always. And that is spastic paralysis due to lesion of upper motor neurons, destruction of upper motor neurons. Is it clear? Because lower motor neurons are now free, will squeeze the muscle, contract the muscle forcefully. It remain the muscles contracted. If the upper motor neurons are fine, but the lower motor neurons are destroyed, then what will happen? Flaccid paralysis, right? No tone in the muscle, because your muscle is not getting any signal from lower motor neurons. No contraction in the muscle. So that is just opposite of spasm. Opposite of spasm, that's the flaccid type paralysis. So we see two types of paralysis due to lesion of the motor neurons. One is called spastic paralysis, in which the muscles are in strongly contractile condition, spasm, and another is flaccid type paralysis, in which the muscle tone is gone. So muscles are very flaccid, relaxed. Here you see the upper motor neurons, this one in the cortex, and then the fiber goes all the way down to ventral horn. You see the lowest part, ventral horn here, and to the muscle. Okay. Spinal cord trauma to the spinal cord, commonly heard problem, particularly in the United States. A lot of motor car accident occurs, right? Highways. So this is a very big problem. So I have already explained you the flaccid and spastic paralysis. Also, spinal cord injury or trauma can cause other types of paralysis: paraplegia, quadriplegia, and hemiplegia. If the injury occurs here in the upper cervical part of the spinal cord, the top part of the spinal cord, just remember, when the injury occurs, the part below is non-functional, right? Dissected from the brain. So that part will be paralyzed or affected. So if injury occurs here, that means the body below that, part below that, will be affected. Make sense? Yes. Yes, because the respiratory muscles are here, right? You need the respiratory muscles to breathe, right? So if paralysis occurs below that, that is dangerous. The respiratory muscles will be affected. So, yeah. So, how many limbs will be affected? 4. That's why it is called quadriplegia. 4 limbs, all 4 limbs, including the trunk, whole trunk of the body is paralyzed. Quadriplegia. Paraplegia. If injury occurs between T1, that means first thoracic vertebrae here, and lumbar 1, anywhere between T1 and lumbar 1, if injury occurs anywhere, then below that will be paralyzed. In this case, only lower limbs and lower part of the trunk are affected. That is called paraplegia. So lower two limbs. And hemiplegia, if one side of the spinal cord injury occurs in one side, that will cause paralysis in one side of the body. So that is hemiplegia, one side, either right or left. So those are three types of paralysis we see due to injury of the spinal cord. You know this person, anybody remember? Yeah, Christopher Reeve, he used to known as Superman, right? It's a very famous artist. He died. Some of you may remember seeing him sitting in wheelchair for a long time because he got quadriplegia. He fell off his horse and broke the spinal cord in upper cervical area. And he died in 2004. His wife started a trust, Spinal Cord Injury Foundation. His wife also died a few years ago. Spent a lot of money for spinal cord injury research. The reflex I have already explained, just repeating. Reflex is a voluntary or involuntary response. Involuntary, right? So, involuntary response due to a stimulus, and that response must be rapid, quick, right? Involuntary. And if you present the stimulus again and again, every time the response should be in same direction, same way. Make sense? If I put flashlight on your eye, people will do what? Constrict. Every time people will constrict. It's not like one time constrict, another time dilate. No? Every time, same response. So, three conditions: autonomic or involuntary, rapid, and same response. Now, there are 5 components of the reflex arc. Reflex arc is the complete pathway of electrical signal. So, there are 5 components. You see here, I can show you in this picture. You know, I mentioned if stimulus is given here, then receptors are here, will receive the signal. So first component is the receptor. Then receptors send signal. This is the sensory pathway. So these are sensory nerves. So receptors send signal via the sensory neurons or nerves to the spinal cord. And now here that I didn't mention, from sensory, how the motor gets signal. If the signal stays within the spinal cord, interneurons are here in between sensory and motor. Interneurons. So anyway, signal goes here, and then motor neurons send signal to the muscle. Here, muscle is the effector. So receptors, sensory neurons, spinal cord is the integration center, and then motor neurons to the effector. So those are 5 components you see here. If something hot you touch, receptors, you have temperature receptors in the skin, will take signal and send to the spinal cord, and then to the motor neurons. Signal will go to the muscle, and muscle is the effector because that will perform the action. Who performs the action is the effector. Okay, so those are 5 components in the reflex arm. This is one type of reflex that we test to see if someone has motor neuron disorder. There are different reflex tests. You know that one is very commonly done, that's the patellar reflex, right? Knee-jerk test, we do that. This is another one. This is called plantar reflex. The name of the reflex is not Babinski's sign. The name of the reflex is plantar reflex. This is the foot. You know, this is the plantar surface, right? Remember? So we scratch the plantar surface of the foot, the sole of the foot, to see if the toes flex. If the nervous system is functioning normally, what should be the response when I scratch? The toes should flex like this, flexion of the toes. Make sense? Now, if you have motor neuron disorder or disease, what can happen? When you scratch, the extension of the toes can occur, and fanning, not only extension but fanning of the toes. So that means the problem is there, something is wrong. So that is the Babinski sign, abnormal response. Make sense? So normal response should be what? Flexion of the toes, right? But if extension of the toes occurs, that is what? Not normal, right? That response is not normal, and that is Babinski's sign. Positive. That means the person might have motor neuron disease. How we scratch? We start at the sole and go along the lateral side of the sole. So, start at the heel and scratch like this, not with something very sharp. It must be blunt, right? So scratch like this and then move like this. So it goes like this, and then you will see like this. That is the plantar reflex. If you test this reflex in infants, the Babinski sign will be positive. Why? What do you think? Yes, motor neurons are not developed yet. You know, very simple. They cannot maintain the balance, right? They cannot walk because their motor neurons are not yet fully established. Motor function is not yet fully developed. Make sense? They cannot hold the urine, the sphincters. So it takes about 2 to 3 years to develop. That's why infants always show Babinski sign positive, but don't take them to the doctor. Okay. So if you see Babinski sign positive, that is normal.